Whoops, a daisy. Accidentally had it on the double. Hello everyone. Today we'll be looking at a video by... that was a really bad start. By Act17Apologetics. Now, he's generally known for his stuff on Islam. But I saw a video that he released a couple of days ago that I thought was kind of, how do I put it? Like, it's not a take that is unique to Act 17, but it's a take that a lot of people hold. This kind of idea that, like, 1984 was a warning. And this is a take that really winds me up. Because, frankly, let's be blunt here. I think that Winston Smith, who's the main character in 1984, had it coming. Godless Engineer did a video on the 5 ways. Oh, it's what you'd expect. Yeah. I probably won't respond to it. Yeah, so, basically, this stream is less about David Wood himself, and more about this really silly attitude that I see from Christians, and from just people generally, about George Orwell. Because, the 1984 meme has become ridiculous. Also, about David Wood's work on Islam, I think I'm going to see if I can get Hassan on to talk about his attitude towards Islam, because I know that it's not always the most fair representation of Islamic thought, and often Islamic thought is a lot more sophisticated than perhaps he gives credit. But that's kind of not related to all of this. So let's pray it doesn't crash as I try to switch to the tab on on OBS, because OBS, if you guys remember, has a habit of crashing when I open up new windows, right? So that should be it. There we go. Okay. I'll scroll back up. Right. Okay. I timed it. I timed it as kind of like a kind of a silly moment, as you can kind of see. I'm gonna pop out the text. Oh, the volume is a bit low. Oh, sorry. I'll turn it up a little bit. Right. Is it low? It shouldn't be. I'm just looking at it right now and it's at max. Let's see if I can boost it a little bit. Yeah, apologies if that's the case. Is it alright? I mean, maybe I'll move my mic a little bit closer to the thing if I can. Hopefully that'll work. Alright, okay. Apparently he's written some great spiritual works. Al-Ghazali. Yeah, I've heard good things about Al-Ghazali. Right. Okay, so I think that the mic quality is a bit better. Yeah, also, I noticed that a lot of people were asking me about the Miracles stream. I have a bunch of ideas of what I was going to do with that, but it's been a lot of work. And over the last few weeks, frankly, I've been a bit lazy. So I haven't gotten around to really doing it. But anyway, let's plow into this video. I might do another response... You know what, I'll do another few response videos over the streaming, I think, over the next few weeks, because I'm going to be completely tied down with assignments, and these are nice, quick, and easy things to do. Alright. Like, literally, the only reason I picked this is because it's kind of annoying. It's kind of irritating me a bit, and I thought it would be something fun to put on the channel to let people know that I'm not dead. Right, let's get the stream chat. Okay. You can't see this, of course. Okay.
With the recent rise of mass censorship, data harvesting, and
That should be coming through fine, is it? Oops. Is that coming through fine, fellas? It should be. I saw that the volume was a bit low earlier on. The Quran, the Muhammad thought that the Trinity was God, Jesus, and Mary. He even says in the Quran. Yeah, that's because there was a sect around in Arabia at that time called the Collyridians who did think that they had that. So,
psychological manipulation on a global scale, we're going to be hearing a lot about George Orwell this year.
I mean, we've been hearing about him constantly, but that's kind of besides the point.
Big Brother, Thought Crime, Thought Police, Room 101, 2 plus 2 equals 5, George Orwell. 1984 was published in 1949, but 5 years earlier, Orwell wrote a letter to Noel Wilmot about the global rise of totalitarianism, and he discusses the concerns that eventually led him to write the ultimate warning novel. Since everything...
Yeah, by the way, I can't remember who said this, but, I mean, we live more in a sort of a brave new world. Like, the 1984 meme is a bit of a boomer meme. And this is basically, you know, this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm tired of this meme.
That's happening all around us is conclusive proof that Orwell's warning has not been heeded. This is a good time to start from the beginning and...
The trouble is that I frankly, I'll be completely blunt with you here. I think that it's a good thing that George Orwell's conception of freedom is dying. I think that his attitude was fundamentally fueled by a bunch of ideas that very much needed to die in the 18th century, let alone now. I think that what we're seeing nowadays, although perhaps pointed in a stupid direction, is in many ways, at least in terms of the application of force, and the application of, you know, just the general attitude of people, is actually kind of an improvement in many ways.
Remind ourselves that even though the world has changed a lot in the past 77 years, people's obsession with controlling us has not. Let's have a look at this letter. The most important parts are towards the end, but the letter isn't terribly long, so we'll go ahead and read all of it. Dear Mr. Wilmot.
Oh, okay, I'll turn it down a little bit like that.
Many thanks for your letter. You asked whether totalitarianism, leader worship, etc. are really on the upgrade, and instance the fact that they are not apparently growing in this country and the USA. So, Orwell had been warning about some dangerous trends. Mr. Wilmot wrote him a letter saying, well, I don't see these trends in the United States or Great Britain, so maybe you're exaggerating the problem. I must say I believe, or fear, that taking the world as a whole, these things are on the increase. Hitler, no doubt, will soon disappear. Good call. This was written before D-Day. Hitler, no doubt, will soon disappear, but only at the expense of strengthening A. Stalin, check, B. the Anglo-American millionaires, check, and C. all sorts of petty Führers of the type of de Gaulle.
You see, the problem that I have with Orwell is that he's terrified of this when this is the standard throughout human history. And I would argue that it's superior to the system that we had in Britain in the wake of the English Civil War, where you had a system where Parliament essentially ruled and the king was just a figurehead. I think that subversion of divine right of kings and the subversion of the better medieval system led to a culture that was ultimately apathetic about truth. As much as somebody like as much as somebody like Orwell may have been some sort of crusader for truth, I think that the kind of society he was attempting to protect with its free speech and with these sorts of attitudes was actually less careful about truth than it ought to have been. And so I find it very hard to relate. And like I say, this is an Anglo, right? So this kind of attitude is everywhere. It's embedded in the culture, where free speech, just let them believe what they want to believe thing. It's like, well, if somebody actually cared about truth, how could you tolerate somebody holding to falsehood? If truth is the highest good, as Orwell seems to hold, how can you tolerate people being wrong? Like obviously wrong. Like there's a difference between opinion on certain things and correspondence to reality, right? And this is the sort of system that freedom of speech in the classical sense defends. It defends this idea that everyone can just live in their own society and kind of navel gaze. And I think that granted, the sort of Führer idolatry was somewhat of an improvement, simply because it actually focused truth in an actual thing that we simply didn't have before. right? Now, I agree that, petty Führers are a bad thing. But I think this should be directed towards God and towards his church and not towards leaders. But it's certainly an improvement over everyone being their own church. And, we just have like this Anglo idea of freedom where we're quiet and we go and have cups of tea. And, I can sit with the freethinker on one hand and I can have the Calvinist on the other. It's like, well, I mean, one of you is wrong. Why would we waste our time with, sometimes flagrant false beliefs? How can you structure a society on a falsehood? Or pretend that there's no such thing as a falsehood?
Charles de Gaulle was a French military officer who refused to accept the armistice with Germany. He went to Great Britain and led the Free France movement. He was popular enough among the French for leading the resistance that he was later elected President of France. All the national movements everywhere, even those that originate in resistance to German domination, seem to take non-democratic forms to group themselves around some superhuman Führer, Hitler in Germany, Stalin in the Soviet Union.
And this is my main contention with this video, and this is my main contention with about 80 to 90% of people's views. Democracy is not synonymous with truth. It's the exact opposite. And this is what Plato pointed out in Book 10 of his Republic, right? When you have societies ran directly by the people, you have a situation where the people who are dominated by their passions, which is, or their emotions, which frankly is most people, are the people that have control. So you can't have a society where it is democratic and where truth reigns. So I find it really funny that Orwell would be complaining about the loss of democracy and about how people don't care about democracy when democracy is antithetical to truth. Now, it also happens that under Plato's model, in the same Book 10 of the Republic, he says that tyranny comes after democracy, which we're seeing, and this is what Orwell is complaining about. But that doesn't somehow mean that, we need to preserve my democracy. It's nonsense.
Union, Salazar in Portugal, Franco in Spain, Gandhi in India, De Valera in Ireland are all varying examples, and to adopt the theory that the end justifies the means. So here's the pattern that Orwell sees.
Yeah, also, I just want to say, not all of these leaders were bad. For example, Franco, right? Defeated communists who were bayoneting nuns. Ended up establishing, yes, an autocratic state, but one that kept Spain, from what I know, in a pretty good financial situation. Salazar, defended Angola, protected the Portuguese colonies, completely restructured the economy after something like 10, I think it may have even been 20 years of troubles, including Freemasonic, infiltration of society. You had presidents going out of the Portuguese government within months. It was complete chaos, right? And Salazar came along and organised it along a more third positionist economic model, taking inspiration to a large extent from Catholic social teaching. Gandhi, I mean, you see the thing with Gandhi, I'm not so keen on him. Obviously Hitler and Stalin, they go without saying, but this, first of all, I don't think Franco was a superhuman Führer. I don't think Salazar was a superhuman Führer either. And I wouldn't say that people like de Gaulle were considered a... Actually, I lie about that. I think that there are some people who did consider de Gaulle in that sense. But we also did the same with Churchill. So, completely meaningless distinction to make.
People come to fear some threat from some enemy, and they rally around some leader who's going to rescue them from the enemy.
Actually, to be fair, we didn't really with Churchill initially, because he was voted out by Attlee in 1946, so that's not strictly true.
But they adopt an end justifies the means attitude. They'll let their leader get away with lying, manipulation, intimidation, mass censorship, mass surveillance, and even brutal violence, as long as the leader is standing against the enemy.
Actually, that's actually a fair point, George Washington. Can you imagine if Subhas Chandra Bose came to power in India instead of instead of Hitler. For those who don't know, Subhash Chandra Bose was the leader of the Indian National Army that fought for the Japanese in Burma, which is now called Myanmar, but I'm still going to call it Burma anyway because it's Burma, against the English, against the British, and against the Indian forces. He was actually like a full-on fascist. And he's complaining about Gandhi. Chandra Bose would have been much more of a bugbear for Orwell than Gandhi ever was, at least to the best of my knowledge.
The allegiance to some superhuman leader can take different forms. Stalin was obviously very different from Gandhi, but Orwell is focused on making a person the focus of one's loyalty.
I mean, like we do that too. We're Christians. We put Jesus Christ as the center of our loyalty. Now, he's also fully God, but he's also fully man. And we've done this for the majority of human history, right? We've always had kings and queens. We've had presidents. There's always a figurehead to lead. I think a lot of this is just this kind of English liberal attitude, like nobody can be the boss of me, but I can't possibly make any noise in the coffee shop if somebody's like butt in front of me in the queue. It just frustrates me endlessly. And like, this is nothing to do with Act 17. This is just a particular attitude that really niggles me. It really, really niggles me.
Everywhere, the world movement seems to be in the direction of centralized economies which can be made to work in an economic sense, but which are not democratically organized and which tend to establish a caste system. A centralized economy is an
Everywhere, the world movement seems to be in the direction of centralized economies, which can be made to work, unquote, in the economic sense, but are not democratically organized and which tend to establish a caste system. That's because the sort of decentralized capitalism that we had in Britain was unique to Britain because only Britain could really fulfill it. What other examples could I come up with that could maybe fulfill it? Maybe America. Maybe the Netherlands, right? France, never like that. Germany, never like that. Russia, never like that. This centralized economic thing only happens because that's how things are forced to work. You can't have free markets everywhere, and which can be made to work in an economic sense, which are not democratically organized and which tend to establish a caste system. Well, I mean, you get caste systems anyway. Like, the richness of Orwell writing in the highly class-conscious 1940s Britain and complaining about caste systems. Like, we're not on the level of somewhere like India, where it's completely formalized and there was laws around it and things like that. But in Britain, there is a decided caste difference, right? You can tell from people's accents. I mean, he probably disapproved as somebody who had socialist leanings himself. But to say, oh, this is like somehow dominating the world, nonsense. This has been there since year dot.
Economy that's controlled by some central authority, usually the government, rather than by market forces. Orwell was a democratic socialist. He thought the economy should be controlled, but controlled by the people, not by leaders who are going to use their position for their own economic advantage. Animal Farm, the most epic smackdown of Soviet-style socialism ever, was published...
No, maybe not. I think Robert Conquest's study did a lot more to communism than Animal Farm ever did.
A year after Orwell wrote this letter. With this go the horrors of emotional nationalism and a tendency to disbelieve in the existence of objective truth because all the facts have to fit in with the words and prophecies of some infallible Führer.
Well, first of all, you see, this is exactly the contradiction that Orwell doesn't point out, right? The existence of objective truth is not a thing in democracy. There is what the people want to be in power at that given time. And second of all, the richness, it's so rich that people would go on about emotional nationalism, or emotional communism, or emotional SJWism, or emotional religiosity, when they're emotional classical liberals. Like, everyone's emotional, right? Like, this sort of stupid pretense that it seems to, it's like a particular kind of classical liberal, right? Who thinks that, like, you know, he's got, like, the world completely sorted out and we can all have our freedoms, you know? And, like, he's completely devoid of, like, emotion when it comes to his judgment. He just judges the world the way it is. Nonsense. Complete nonsense. Now, I happen to agree that a lot of the nationalism that was going on at Orwell's time was bad. Not because it was emotional, but because it was idolatrous. This is the real problem that he's complaining about. You know, just because a guy is saying it, and just because somebody is prizing a guy, that doesn't contradict the existence of objective truth. It only contradicts insofar as the man doesn't care about objective truth. You know, like Pharaoh, right? This is what he's essentially complaining about. Pharaoh worship. But what he's saying that we should replace that with is a bunch of little pharaohs mixed in with a few Moseses and a few Aarons, and then we can just, like, come to consensus. That doesn't solve the problem of objective truth. It'd be a lot easier if we just picked one Moses and one Aaron and they ruled over us.
In other words, once people rally around some leader who's going to protect them from some enemy, they become so loyal to that leader that their decisions are made primarily based on loyalty rather than on facts or evidence.
Oh, come on, an atheist could say this about a Christian. This is what I don't like about this argument. You could use this to demolish any system. You could use this on like classical liberals to demolish Locke. You could use this on Christians against the Bible. You could use this on Muslims against the Quran. Right? Like, what are you left with? Like you could use this on Orwell. Like, okay, Orwell, like, if you're so democratic, then why should I even listen to you? Right? There's so many of these other people that could be making decisions. You could be overruled by the majority. You could be overruled in the Houses of Parliament, the Houses of Commons. Well, what exactly gives you a monopoly on truth? Why should I listen to you?
I would add that people who hate the leader can do the same.
This is a real rant. This is one of those videos that I'm kind of enjoying because I get to rant. It's like you can destroy. This attitude just destroys everything. Oh, like you're just following the leader because like you can't think for yourself. I mean, everything is on faith. Everything is based on faith. Faith in science. You know, this is fundamentally a faith. You need to know that you need to believe that your sensors are reliable. You need to believe that the statistical models that you are using to process the data are reliable. Now, that doesn't mean that there doesn't have to be good reason. You can have good reasons for believing things. But that doesn't mean that it's ultimately not taken on faith. I mean, you don't have, like, outside of accepting, you know, the laws of logic, which are essentially irrefutable, even then you don't have, like, complete 100% certainty. So like, it all ultimately comes on some level down to a level of faith. I mean, like, the laws of logic, have any of you ever seen that walking around the wild? No. Do we know they're true? Yes. You know, and faith is belief in that which is unseen. So, like, to make this just stupid pretension against other people because they believe in something that, you know, like, lol, they follow a leader. You know, this is stupid. Everyone does that.
Same thing. Their decisions can be made based on their anger against the leader rather than on facts or evidence. Consider two.
Well, I mean, like, this is what I'm saying. The two aren't incompatible, but you ultimately come down to one or another, right? Like, for example, actually, this is a good example. The laws of logic, right? They describe what is in being and what isn't. They describe what is true and false. True being that which is correspondent to being, and that which isn't. Now, this is ultimately just appeal to authority with God. I think St. Pope John Paul II actually said this, right? All logic ultimately is just whether or not God says so. because it's appealing to the being of the things that we see in the world that's created around us. And even, you know, Plato and Aristotle would say this on some level. You know, being ultimately, you know, determines truth, and being is personal. Right? Maybe not like Aristotle or Plato, or maybe not Plato necessarily, right? But you're still ultimately appealing to some sort of personal authority, regardless of the way you look at it.
Two recent examples. Was the election stolen from Donald Trump? You can put the exact same evidence in front of someone who loves Trump and someone who hates Trump, and the person who loves Trump will say, yes, the election was clearly stolen from Donald Trump, while the person who hates Trump will say, no, Joe Biden won fair and square. Similarly, this has been popping up in a ton of videos over the past 2 days.
Actually, this point I like this point because it really does miss something pretty big.
Did Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lie about or misrepresent the danger she was in during the Capitol Hill siege? Go look at how people are answering that question on Twitter. People who love AOC say that she didn't lie about or misrepresent anything. People who hate AOC say that she lied and should be removed from office. When people are looking at the exact same evidence and giving contradictory answers to questions, it becomes clear that truth and facts aren't the deciding factor. At least one side is making decisions based on something other than truth and facts. Now, if your blood pressure just skyrocketed as soon as I mentioned Trump or AOC, or if you're freaking out because I mentioned them without showering the one you like with praise or heaping abuse on the one you don't like, you're the sort of person Orwell is talking about.
David, that's everyone. Like, half of your channel is going against Islam. And I imagine a lot of those videos are to do with misrepresentations of Jesus in the Quran. Right? Things that we can, you know, argue about, and I think incredibly convincingly that are false, but still, nonetheless, people get heated because they care about them. Like, so Orwell, if this is actually Orwell's point, right? He's just complaining about anybody who's emotionally invested in anything. Like, Orwell could do the same thing, you know, with, like, socialism or whatever, right? Like, he clearly cares about, like, a particular opinion on a certain thing as well, right? Like this, it just winds me up, right? That people will, on one hand, say, oh, like 1984 wasn't an instruction manual for the things that they don't like, and then they'll go, oh, this is based and red-pilled for the things that they do like, right? I mean, you're a human being. Yeah, I know Beverly. I know he's a psychopath, right? But he still has investment in things. Like, it doesn't have to be an emotional reaction, right? Because essentially what David or Orwell is positing here is that if you have any kind of investment, be it emotional or not, or any kind of attachment, then you're part of the problem. Or at least that's how I'm reading it, unless I'm making some, like, grand mistake. Like, what Orwell is complaining about here is something that is essentially human. The only problem here is that... The only problem that I can see here is that people are placing their faith in the wrong thing, right? Of course you shouldn't place your faith in Hitler. Of course you shouldn't place your faith in a leader, right? But it is a response to this kind of irritating, like, skepticism. And this irritating destruction of culture that was going on at the beginning of the 20th century that led to this. People saw their lives being destroyed by the Industrial Revolution. They saw their lives being destroyed by the First World War. They saw their lives being destroyed by the continual march of a secular academic structure that was trying to squeeze the life out of the civilizations that they were in. And so they reacted by electing leaders who were bad. And it's going to be the same soon. Like, the only problem with what they're doing is that they're focusing their energies on the wrong things. They should have been focusing them on God. Because God is truth. And God is also a man. You know, he's incarnate as Christ. We know this from the scriptures. We know this from the Turin Shroud. We know all of these things. We have all of this evidence here. Just as in Germany, I imagine in 1933, there were a bunch of supporters, Nazi supporters around a table, discussing the rational reasons for electing Adolf Hitler. You know, people were being killed in the streets. People were starving, like, not so long ago. Right? People were suffering, like, horrendous financial problems, and they saw a solution in Hitler. And so they placed their faith in him because they thought about it. They just thought wrong. Same with the communist movements, right? There were starving peasants in Russia in 1917 who wanted a situation with the war to change. And so they followed the socialists. Like... It's the same. It's exactly the same thing that Orwell is doing by looking at democracy, and I was like, wow, look at how brilliant the English society was. You know, I really hope that it doesn't change. Right? It's the same thing. It's just that the problem he has is that he seems to think there was no reasoning when actually there probably was on behalf of a lot of people. Like, not all of the Nazis not all the people who voted for Hitler were stupid. Not all of the people who backed Stalin and Lenin were stupid. And not all the people who backed Salazar or De Valera or Gandhi or Subhas Chandra Bose were stupid. They sat and reasoned it as well. They just reasoned wrong. And that's what we should be focusing on here. Not like, oh no, leaders. It's a complete misdirection from what I think the ultimate point is.
Truth takes a back seat to loyalty or rage. What happens when this trend continues? Already, history has, in a sense, ceased to exist, i.e., there is no such thing as a history of our own times which could be universally accepted, and the exact sciences are endangered as soon as military necessity ceases to keep people up to the mark.
You see, the reason why Orwell is complaining about this is because in the British public school, I think he was public school, the British public schools which he grew up in, they were very, very straightforward in teaching history. They just taught the facts and that's all there was, right? And, you know, life isn't like that. Life isn't like that, and neither's history. You have hundreds of sources and you have to discern logically whether or not this thing happened, you know? You've got, you know, for example, Jesus rising from the dead, right? You've got 4 Gospels, you've got the writings of the Fathers, and you've got the Turin Shroud, and you've got a bunch of other things, right? On the other hand, you have the Jews in the Mishnah. And, frankly, the Jewish Mishnah is an abysmal source. It makes numerous historical errors, like often flagrant ones. And, it's complete chaos, right? Your contradictory source also has a direct vested interest in destroying a particular narrative. Now, also, you could say that the Gospels do that as well, right? But you also have other sources as well. Josephus, Shlomo Pines' discovery of the true testimony of Flavius Josephus, right? You know, it said, you know, his followers said that Jesus rose from the dead. You know, and this is besides the somewhat embellished interpolation that exists in most translations of Josephus' Antiquities. You know, you have that. You have the testimony of the Turin Shroud, which, frankly, there is an incredibly strong case for. Right? It's the same with all of history. Like saying, already history has ceased to exist, i.e. there's no such thing as a history in our own times that can be universally accepted. Of course, because human beings are different. Human beings are different. Everyone is writing from different points of view. And the only way that you get like a universally accepted history is when you have a societal consensus. And these were times where there wasn't a societal consensus. And the exact sciences are endangered as soon as military necessity ceases to keep people up to the mark. I assume he's referring to Lysenkoism and things like that, right? Well, I mean, it's the same with science, right? Like all these scientists, or at least the public intellectuals, they like to pretend that science is this reliable, thing, and it simply isn't. You go and dig into the current problems of the scientific method, you look at them from the perspective that they ought to be looked at, and you realise there's some gigantic gaping holes in it. Like, if I'm entirely honest with you, like, given the reading that I've done, I would rely on the Bible any day of the week, over relying on any scientific study that comes out of university. Just simply because I know that the sources there are more reliable because I've read the scholarship behind them. Whereas I've read a lot of, like a reasonable amount of the scholarship behind the sciences, and I don't like what I see. This doesn't mean that there isn't an objective correct, view. But, why do I even bother? It doesn't mean that there's not like an objective truth there behind it all. It's just that it's a lot more complex to get to that truth than people pretend it is.
Hitler can say that the Jews started the war, and if he survives, that will become official history. He can't say that 2 and 2 are 5 because, for the purposes of, say, ballistics, they have to make 4. But if the sort of world that I am afraid of arrives, a world of 2 or 3 great superstates which are unable to conquer one another, 2 and 2 could become 5 if the Fuhrer wished it.
And you see, this portrays... I mean, it couldn't. Objectively, he might say it, but he'd still be wrong. Actually, I kind of see it now, because he's a Democrat, right? So I think on a certain level, he seems to think that the demos determines truth. So if you've got a Fuhrer over that demos determining what they're thinking, then they could do that. Trouble is, that's not how reality works. Now, it could be that he burns all of the historical records to show, I don't know, like the Holocaust or something. That wouldn't change the fact that it happened.
That, so far as I can see, is the direction in which we are actually moving. Though, of course, the process is reversible. These parts about 3 great superstates that can't conquer one another and 2 plus 2 becoming 5 should sound familiar if you've read 1984. But notice this part about the sciences becoming endangered so long as they're not needed for something like waging war. Think about a topic like gender. Gender has a biological definition. It's ultimately a scientific concept.
I mean, you see, the hilarious thing about this is that Orwell is writing at the time where the entire Newtonian attitude towards physical sciences completely collapsed in the wake of the quantum revolution. So he's speaking about exact sciences being endangered when scientists around this time were discovering things like the inherent indeterminism of physical phenomena. Right? So they cease to be as exact just by virtue of the fact that we discovered that they aren't.
But what happens if a powerful enough group decides to completely redefine things? Suddenly, you have to abandon the biological definition, and if you don't immediately abandon the biological definition and accept the new definition without question, you become an instant target for destruction. We're all being trained to say that 2 plus 2 equals 5 on command. 2 plus 2 could become 5.
Oh, come on. Like, you know what's going to happen? Okay, you become like a persona non grata, right? They delete you off of Facebook, they delete you off of Twitter, and they delete you off of YouTube. So what? So what? You're still breathing, aren't you? Jesus was homeless.
Tomorrow, all we would need for that to happen is a popular trend on social media claiming that if you don't believe 2 plus 2 is 5, you're a racist. As to the comparative immunity of Britain and the...
Like, who cares? Who cares, like, what these people think? Like, oh, they called me a racist. Come on, like, calling somebody a racist is completely, it's basically lost its meaning at this point. Like, the average person is starting not to care. Everyone I don't like is racist now, right? Like, this is what has become of our society, and it's completely lost its power.
USA, whatever the...
Like, I don't like this. Like, people will defame me and make a persona non grata. Yeah, so what? That's the life of the Christian. That is what Christ told us to expect. So what? It will be hard. Yes, it will be. So? So what?
Pacifists, etc., may say, we have not gone totalitarian yet, and this is a very hopeful symptom. I wonder what Orwell would think of big tech taking over the public square, engaging in mass censorship, and selling user data.
He might write a really long Reddit post. No, that was horrible. No, that was horrible. I think he'd probably write like a bunch of tweets.
I believe very deeply, as I explained in my book The Lion and the Unicorn, in the English people and in their capacity to centralize their economy without destroying freedom in doing so. But one must remember that Britain and the USA haven't been really tried. They haven't known defeat or severe suffering, and there are some bad symptoms to balance the good ones. To begin with...
Okay, I believe... Sorry, I'm reading this for my own sake. I believe very deeply that the English people and their capacity to centralize the economy without destroying freedom in doing so. Well, I'm sitting here about 75 years after he wrote this. No, we did lose a lot of freedom. Sorry. I think this was one of his incorrect predictions. He wasn't a prophet.
There is the general indifference to the decay of democracy. Do you realize, for instance, that no one in England under 26 now has a vote, and that so far as one can see, the great mass of people of that age don't give a damn for this? Secondly, and here's where things get interesting,
the general indifference to the decay of... Yeah, I am completely indifferent to the decay of democracy. Completely. Because the sooner we get out of democracy and into tyranny, if we follow Plato, the sooner we can get out the other end and actually establish something good. Right? Rather than pretending, no, my democracy merinos. He's going to go on about the vote, isn't he, now?
There is the fact that the intellectuals are more totalitarian in outlook than the common people.
Okay, so for instance, that no one in England under 26 now has the vote, and that so far as one can see, the great mass of people of that age don't care. Well, yeah, because the vote means nothing. Like, I think it was Nicholas the Same Tell said this. You know, the people who have the real power are the people who can climb through the political parties. Like, it's not... It's like the vote doesn't matter, and it didn't matter then. Like, Orwell was in a unique position because he could write in a time where people were still reading books because they didn't have widespread television at that point in Britain. In fact, T.S. Eliot was writing in the beginning of the 1950s, you know, warning Britain against mass introduction of the television. Radio was there, but obviously radio isn't quite as enthralling as television. So he could influence tons of minds simply by writing a book and being a notable author, which is of the same scale as being like a major politician in a political party. But the vote means it's almost nothing. Like, on its own. You have to be able to mobilize thousands upon thousands of them to do anything. And if you've got this whole attitude of like, oh, everyone needs freedom of speech, and everyone's like ricocheting off the walls and like having their own opinions and like climbing, you know, into nothing, right? Then, I mean, you're not going to get anything done, are you?
Intellectuals are more totalitarian in outlook than the common people. On the whole, the English intelligentsia have opposed Hitler, but only at the price of accepting Stalin. Most of them are perfectly ready for dictatorial methods, secret police, systematic falsification of history, etc., so long as they feel that it is on our side.
This is really funny. Really, really funny. Considering that this democratic attitude was won at the hands of the blood of hundreds of thousands of people. As if Orwell's point of view wasn't formed by exactly the same thing. Go and read about the Jacobites. Go and read about the overthrowing of James II. Go and read about the frankly, I think illegal institution of the Constitution of 1688. Go and read about all of the different changes that went on in the time in between. I mean, this is the rule of history. Like, people will believe things that are on our side, and this includes Orwell, and it also includes me to some extent. We're all influenced by like what our opinions of the world are, right? There's no such thing as like perceiving in a vacuum unless you're literally God. We are humans. We are fallible. Like, you don't get to have like the objective 100% view. Now, you can make an incredibly strong case and convince people. And, you know, there are some things that are frankly irrefutable. This is why we have systems of logic. But to pretend, like, in cases of history, as if this is the case, like, in a completely infallible 100% way without faith, is absurd. It's a fantasy.
Sound familiar? Are the politicians and journalists and educators and entertainers and tech CEOs of our time against totalitarianism? Or are they perfectly ready for dictatorial...
Oh, come on. The same classical liberal attitude is just as totalitarian, right? They come in, they walk in, they say, oh, you can have all your freedoms that you want as long as they're classical liberal freedoms. What's the difference? Oh, you can have all of the rights that are prescribed of by John Locke, or whatever. Like, what's the difference? Like Hitler hurt my feelings? Yes, we can tell from natural law that he was wrong. But there were also flaws in the classical liberal system.
Methods, secret police, systematic falsification of history, etc., so long as they feel that it's on their side. This goes back to the point about the end justifying the means. The reasoning of a...
I mean, it was the same thing. It was the same thing in the schools that Orwell went to. They made Mary the First Queen of England look as if she was a horrific person who murdered, 287 Protestants. What they'll ignore, I'm downplaying those same schools, is that Elizabeth killed 3,000. Yes, history is a complicated thing. Like, it bugs me when like, there's someone such as Orwell, who is somebody who's clearly very strongly politically involved, has the gall to complain when other people act in a similar way. Oh no, we're losing our English freedom, as if that English freedom wasn't built on the bodies of tens of thousands of people massacred in cold blood. Yes, that is the rule of history.
A tech CEO or a journalist goes something like this. Well, yes, it's regrettable that we have to censor anyone we disagree with and that we have to try to destroy their lives. But the people who disagree with us are so evil that we have a moral obligation to silence them by any means necessary.
I mean, like, I'm going to take a very strong guess here and suggest that George Orwell wasn't against the Second World War. I'm going to take a very strong guess and suggest that, right? At least when it was being fought, right? This is talking about, opposing Hitler and destroying Hitler, and it ultimately ended in killing Hitler. Yes, because he was a bad man. He did bad things. It just really bugs me, and this may be me making like a mountain out of a molehill. This may not actually be what George Orwell was saying. But I have seen so many people just go like, "Oh, 1984 was an instruction manual," it needs a proper repudiation. These people need to be, like slapped into realizing, you're no different.
Indeed, the statement that we haven't a fascist movement in England largely means that the young, at this moment, look for their Führer elsewhere. One can't be sure that that won't change, nor can one be sure that the common people won't think 10 years hence as the intellectuals do now. I hope they won't. I even trust they won't. But if so, it will be at the cost of a struggle. If one simply proclaims that all is for the best and doesn't point to the sinister symptoms, one is merely helping to bring totalitarianism nearer. And here we're starting to see why he wrote 1984.
I'm sorry, but this seems to pretend that freedom of speech is anything but something that melts societies. If you give people complete freedom of speech, as we did in Britain, you have all of these people deliberately spreading falsehoods a lot of the time, right? Or spreading like incredibly flawed ideas about the world, and you know what that does? It destroys people's ability to obtain happiness. There's a reason why Torquemada used to burn heretics, right? And it's because these people were a threat to the continued existence of the society and the state that it was in. People's souls were at risk. Not only that, people's families were at risk.
If you don't point to the symptoms, if you don't expose what's going on, you're helping to bring totalitarianism nearer.
As if classical liberalism isn't totalitarian in its own way.
You also ask, if I think the world tendency is towards fascism, why do I support the war? It is a choice of evils. I fancy nearly every war is that. I know.
Yes, and these people made a different choice. This is my point.
I know enough of British imperialism not to like it, but I would support it against Nazism or Japanese imperialism as the lesser evil. Similarly, I would support the USSR against Germany because I think the USSR cannot altogether escape its past and retain...
Great job, Orwell, right? Yeah, okay, you have an opinion. That's fine. Makes sense. But you're in a you've conceded democracy here, right? The Germans voted in Hitler. They thought Hitler was going to solve their problems. Right? The Parliament, they allowed in King William of Orange to overthrow James II. They made a choice and it led to your ideology. Right? Like, this is, like, I fail to see, like, this is why we have all these ancient writings and all of these writings from the church and things like that, so we can discern the truth. But considering all he's banked on is democracy, like, he doesn't have any of this toolkit.
Enough of the original ideas of the revolution to make it a more hopeful phenomenon than Nazi Germany. I think, and have thought ever since the war began in 1936 or thereabouts, that our cause is the better. But we have to keep on making it the better, which involves constant criticism.
I mean, that last sentence could be yours sincerely, Goebbels. Like, if we're just going to be basing this completely on like a democratic, classical liberal idea of reality, right? Then, where is the grounding for this? It's like, okay, so it's someone's opinion against another's, right? We can talk of evidence, we can talk of that, but ultimately it's faith. And someone decided differently, I'm repeating myself at this point.
Yours sincerely, George Orwell. Our cause is better, but we have to keep making it better, and this involves constant criticism. We have to criticize dangerous trends in our own nations, in our own groups, among adherents of our own ideologies.
Except when you have people who will actually criticize good things and will so destroy the cultures. For example, like the leftists of the, maybe not of Orwell's stripe, but the leftists who went and destroyed the grammar school system in Britain, thus subverting the education of working class boys who had, a higher level of intelligence than their peers, and so therefore destroying social mobility. How about that one, right? How about those intellectuals, those men of letters, who destroyed that social institution because they saw classism there? Did they not think that that was a great evil? What about those Bolsheviks who overthrew the Tsarists after years of the people starving in Kronstadt and in Petrograd, right? Did they not have a point? Of course they did. But when we're speaking purely democratically here, we have no means of grounding it. Particularly if we can't believe in a person. You need in some way, there needs to be a person at some point who needs to be trusted with truth. Now, it happens to be Jesus, right, in our case, and we have tons and tons of reasons for believing why. And that's the problem here. It's not the problem of believing person, thought police. It's where you are sourcing that truth from. That is the discernment that needs to be made. Now, I can agree with Orwell that National Socialism is perhaps an inferior ideology to classical liberalism in many ways. Yes, maybe, right? But that doesn't mean anything really. In the grand scheme, it's besides the point I'm making. We need to be able to objectively rank these things, and classical liberalism doesn't really give us that. It just eats away, it claws away. It's a system that's essentially designed to sustain numerous Protestant sects in a country in such a way that still makes the state viable and profitable.
Notice the obvious difference between, on the one hand, constant criticism for the sake of making your cause better, and, on the other hand, the sort of leader worship or ideology worship that conditions people to have an emotional outburst whenever the leader or the ideology is criticized in...
Yes, but the problem is that this same truth is not impersonal, so we're ultimately going to be trusting in a person whether we like it or not. Be it Jesus, be it Moses, be it Muhammad, be it anybody. There will ultimately be a person in there somewhere. Necessarily. So, this dichotomy is nonsense. And could only come out of... I believe that Orwell was an atheist. Right? It could only come out of somebody who's atheist.
Anyway, silencing critics clears the path to totalitarianism. And that's why the most dangerous leaders and ideologies don't just demand unquestioning obedience from their followers, but must also silence their opponents through censorship, intimidation, and violence. For more insights from George Orwell, be sure to watch my video.
Well, I mean, that's how you sustain societies for the majority of history. So this is pretty much done, I think we can fairly say. I'll tell you what, I'm going to open up the floor to some questions if people have any. I'll be back in 2 minutes, okay? Let's see, questions. Okay. Have you read Johann Georg Hamann and his Metacritic of the Purism of Reason? He lived around the same time as Kant. No, I haven't. I haven't read that at all. What's the icon of the monk? Also, what's your opinion on the veneration of Eastern Orthodox saints among Catholics? Love your content, by the way. Right, the icon of the monk was actually one I found on a Facebook group, and I messaged the guy and asked for a better definition version of it. It's not a particular icon, but I'll drag it around a little bit so you can see. So, here the monk, and this is supposed to be any monk, is crucified here, and he is hit by the points of the passions. So envy, gluttony, avarice, anger, lust, pride, and I think despair. It could have been acedia. I didn't read that correctly. So the point is that the monk's life is to be crucified, and the arrows which drive him onto which are part of what causes the pain on the cross are the passions that he's trying to defeat. So, you know, you look at this and you meditate and you remember, you remember the specific vices that you're supposed to be fighting in the life of, to be honest, any Christian. Is China tyrannic because of having tyrannies all of its history? I don't know much about Chinese history, but I know that China has a tendency towards a more authoritarian way of being. Music was way too loud. Sorry about that. Chat was a mess this stream. Yeah, it kind of was. I saw the people in the chat. Marie Antoinette was hated by the French people for mostly trivial faults that were pushed away out of proportion. But it wasn't just that. Her character was defamed really badly at points. Like, I seem to recall that there was a rumour that she cheated on Louis XVI, and that was spread about a lot. Orwell wrote 1984 because he was a good Republican and would have voted for Reagan. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, like, this was kind of a ramble and a bit of a rant, but it's so annoying, right? These people who will come on and they'll say things like, "Oh, you believe in a person, we believe in truth." It's like, truth's personal. And I don't mean in the sense that it's unique to each individual person in a postmodernist sense. I mean in the sense that truth actually is a person. It is, you know, the Trinity. You know, the Trinity made the world. We know this from Christianity. We can infer this from Platonism. We can infer from Platonism that there is a personal being that created all of being. You know, we know this. We can infer this from any participation metaphysics, right? Which the world ultimately is. I think it was Werner Heisenberg who said that, or it may have been Schrödinger. You know, we can discern that this being must necessarily be personal because personhood isn't a privation of being. So, thus it must follow that truth is a person. It's just, oh no, like silencing. Don't silence people. That might hurt people's feelings. Who cares? Like there are some people who really aren't particularly useful to the conversation. And this meme, this really stupid meme of the free marketplace of ideas. Well, look what your free marketplace of ideas did, right? John Stuart Mill was writing about that in the middle of the 19th century. What have we got now? Mass abortion, mass contraception, the crashing in birth rates, like widespread despair amongst young people to the point like you can't find you know, like a partner or something like that. You know, like it's everywhere. And you know, like that's what won the free marketplace of ideas. A degeneracy won the free marketplace of ideas because the majority of people are driven by their passions. This is what Plato warned us about. Okay. what's your general opinion on Vatican II? Is there any valid criticism, or should it be accepted? It should be completely accepted as it is. If you decide that Vatican II isn't a valid ecumenical council, you cease to be Catholic. Were there problems in its implementation? Yes. I believe that the actual rubrics for implementing the council still aren't translated from Latin. There's all kinds of problems. Is the pantheistic concept of God equals everything refuted by the fact that the God is, in that case, is composite, thereby invoking the first cause argument from Aquinas? What a pantheist would say is that nothing is composed. I mean, you see, I think that the biggest problem for the pantheistic position to take account for is the creation of things and the destruction of things, so generation and corruption, as Aristotle puts it. Because this is clearly something that happens. You know, people cease to be alive. You know, they lose something. You can lose things in all kinds of ways. What's your thoughts on Nouvelle Theologie? I've heard there's some good stuff in there. Was it Saint Pope John Paul II who was Nouvelle Theologie? I know that Ratzinger took parts of it. He was like more concilium. A lot. Yeah, there's some good stuff there. It's much more modern in its view, but it's not at odds with Thomism, from what I've heard. What are your opinions on crypto coins, and do you think that they're going to be regulated? Also, congrats on full communion. Thank you. I would avoid them. I'll say that. How do you define the concept of personhood? Well, that's a difficult one. That's like asking me to unpack an entire sub-subject of metaphysics in a way that I don't really know how to articulate, but you know that there's a difference between a stone and a human being. I'll say that. In the case that I'm describing here, I am describing, you know, personhood as a single property, as opposed to, you know, composition of you know, body and soul or whatever. I have no idea about Althusser at all. But we need dialogue to expose to their weak arguments. Yeah, I agree that dialogue is needed to some extent, but I don't think that just anyone should be able to talk. You know, like the vast majority of people have almost nothing to contribute to most conversations because they just simply don't know what they're talking about. You know, if you want to see the results of democracy, go on to, for example, any popular YouTube video, be it intellectual or not, and read the comment section, and that will be the free marketplace of ideas in play. Can a Catholic be in good standing and be a third positionist? Yes, but not a Nazi. There are certain kinds you can't be. You can't really be a fascist either, because that's state idolatry as well. But if you'd consider, I'd consider Catholic social teaching in many ways to be third positionist. Distributism is certain. I would consider to be third positionist. What's your opinion on German idealism? I don't have one. What, in your opinion, is the philosopher you would want most to describe as peak Reddit? I don't know. I think that would be cruel. I don't know. I know who I would say, but I'm not going to say it. What or who convinced you at the end of the day to become a Catholic over Orthodox? At the time, it was reading the Fathers, but the more I think about it, the Bible. Do you know if Orwell ever read or even met Spengler? I would be very surprised if he didn't read Spengler. Spengler was very popular in the early 1920s, and I think he was an adult at that point. Favourite football club? Aston Villa. Anyway, we've been going for quite a while, so I'm going to tune out. Hopefully I'll have the stream on miracles pretty soon. We're going to go over some philosophical arguments against miracles, and then we're going to go through some of the historiography behind Our Lady of Guadalupe. We're going to look at Fatima. We're going to look at Eucharistic miracles, and the one I'm most excited to go over is the Shroud of Turin, because I'm 100% convinced, based on the video by Joy of the Faith and by looking over some of the papers myself, I am pretty much 100% convinced that it is Jesus' burial shroud. Anyway, see you guys later. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.